Chapter 20, Sympathy for the Vessel. Lucifer had developed a small habit that he wasn't sure was healthy. It had only served to ruin him so far, but it was his to deal with in whatever way he wished, and he chose to keep it despite the problems it had caused. It really only called for a readjustment of priorities, although priorities really hadn't been a priority in years. His habit, his guilty pleasure if you care to call it such, even if he wasn't guilty for it per se, was to care for Sammy Winchester, in every definition you could twist that into. His vice was to protect the boy, right every wrong bestowed upon him, to give him thought above all else, to take responsibility for him, to claim him as his own, and to look out for him any way he could. Oftentimes he became misguided in such attempts, but he genuinely felt he'd done right by the boy on several occasions, even if Sam saw otherwise. He wished to surpass his promise to never really hurt Sam. He wanted to make him smile, at least once. He wanted to add a little rock to the plate of retribution on the scale reflecting how badly he'd fucked up Sam's life and chances of ever being happy. Because really, everything that had been done to lead Sam to him, it was all for his squabble with his brother. He'd told Azazel to find the baby and prepare him. The demon didn't have to destroy his entire life twice. But only the events as they occurred could have brought Sam to him, and he knew that all the way back then. It was just before the human showed him he could care about it. And look where the squabble ended up. Before at least he could lie to himself and say, "It will be worth it when we win, then I'll make him happy and it'll all be worth it." But it only landed the only two people he still really loved in a hell within hell. Ironically for Sam, not that he'd ever get any undeserved credit for his attempts, his many, many failed attempts. His first was to give Sam comfort through the form of that woman he missed. He still never lied, but he tried to say anything he could to make Sammy feel better. Of course, Sam, being as much of a smart little monkey as he was, figured it out by Lucifer's second try. Still, Lucifer tried to assure Sam he didn't have any ill intentions, but Sam was convinced Lucifer wanted nothing but to manipulate him. Then he tried to explain why he had to do it when he raised Death, tried to reassure Sam that there wasn't anything he or Dean could do. Don't get him started on Dean. He wouldn't say Dean was a bad person. Sam loved him, and if he was important to Sam, he was important to Lucifer to some degree. He let Dean get away with quite a bit, even if he liked Dean about as much as he liked humanity as a whole. All for Sammy. Of course, he could only put up with so much, but Sam's love for his brother definitely intensified Lucifer's patience, and he could admit to himself he held some hint of fond affection for Dean in some faint familial way. His next attempt to protect Sam was the day he'd killed his brother. Or at least so he thought. Those pagans thinking they'd kidnap Sam, his vessel, without any repercussions. So of course when Mercury called him, he was enraged. He'd never really given much thought to the pagans. Why would he? They were smart enough to stay out of his way, dumb enough to not be a threat. His father never paid much mind to the pagans for mostly the same reason. But those fools actually considered killing the boys. They were going to hurt Sam. Mercury had made such very clear. That was good of him, but he'd conspired to kidnap and hurt the Winchesters the same as the rest. And he didn't want any of them to threaten Sam ever again. He wanted to send a clear message to anyone stupid enough to try. But Michael's tactics in getting Dean to say yes left Sam with little faith in Lucifer's promises and much fear of his power. He'd only wanted Sam safe and away from those savages. and Gabriel gave up his life for some goddess. The next time worth mentioning was the gift he thought Sam would genuinely appreciate. Of course he didn't, not openly at least. Lucifer found Sam's compassion ever so cute, but sometimes it could be a real bummer. This was when he gathered all the demons Azazel had used to twist and manipulate his poor Sammy in their former forms. That part was probably unneeded, though. He could have had them take some junk bodies, dead or useless people. But if he had gotten to Brady before the boys had, oh, would it have been a bonus. A big bonus. It turned out to just upset Sam, partially because he hadn't known a few of them had been demons. But hey, if Lucifer could ever admit he was a screw-up, his first and foremost greatest overall track record of utter failure would be when it came to Sammy. When comforting Sam was his downfall, was the day of the fight. Dean pissed him off more than usual, manipulating Castiel into hurting their eldest brother. It really wasn't Lucifer's fault he reacted with such a short temper. Sam knows he'd do the same if someone manipulated Adam into hurting Dean. He'd probably be willing to kill them. But Sam cared about Dean, so even then, Lucifer wouldn't have actually killed Dean. He'd have come damn close, but that only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, right? But Sammy got sentimental. He became so upset, like his mind was flooding itself. It was the most wrong his and Sam's coexistence had felt since the ever so fateful night Sammy said yes. Maybe he should have blocked him out, pushed a little harder, but that was how you burnt a good vessel right out. He just couldn't. What good would any of it have been if he ended up having to be alone without Sammy? Some points just aren't worth proving. Lucifer had worried that would be the last time he got his fix. Worried Michael would get back and take the chance to take Lucifer out with ease by attacking Sam instead. But no, his brother had tried to save him instead, which led to the next incident in which Lucifer took care of Sam. Lucifer could be spiteful, petty, really hold a grudge, but Michael had always been the more truly wrathful one, and after they'd all fallen, it truly showed. Lucy had become a master of manipulating the cage to a good degree of comfort. He'd made sure that he and Michael were in a form most appealingly visible to the boys, both of them as the only other vessels they'd taken. Michael as John when he was young, and Lucifer as Nick. He'd also kept the boys from being immediately physically torn up by the cage, but Michael didn't think of that. He only thought of Adam being unconscious because he'd taken the fall badly, and how Sam had thrown the four of them into the pit and ruined everything. Lucifer tried to calm Michael down once the yelling became even slightly excessive, but Michael would never calm himself at Lucifer's request. His temper only escalated. He tried to strike Sam, and Lucifer got in his path instead, fought with him instead. Michael gave him a good licking, mostly because he was trying to keep the fight tame, keeping the boys, mostly Sam, safe. But he got the feeling Michael was holding back through the second half for the same reason, and he knew Michael held no concern for Sam's safety, not as upset as he was. Lucifer kept up his habit in the cage. He kept Michael from hurting Sam, and when he wasn't, he made sure Sam wasn't burning his own mind out. Yes, Lucifer had tortured Sam to some degree, mostly psychologically or emotionally. Very rarely did it get physical, and when it did, it was usually to give a welcomed break to his mind between how gently Lucifer applied the pain and how Lucifer sweet-talked him. It at most lured him into a false sense of security, and at least it allowed Luce to lull Sam into the closest thing to a nap you could get in the cage. Normally, they'd always be plagued by nightmares to rot your very soul, but Lucifer could manipulate that to give Sam rare little gems of hope in the form of dreams of visitations by loved ones, only comforting, never painful. Sam's favorite dream was when Lucifer took Dean's form. One dream Lucifer had noted Sam was particularly comforted by was sitting on their car, watching the stars, drinking some beers, reminiscing and laughing. Lucifer telling him in Dean's voice that he was doing just as he swore. It went on like that for 180-ish years. His only comfort when Sam left was that Sam didn't have to suffer anymore, and that he could at least try to reach out to Sam through their bond, the mark his grace left on his soul. But just when he'd almost broken through to reach Sam, Cass took the connection, and he knew he'd never be able to reach out to Sam again. That is, until he was out as well. He didn't really come to until he was lowered onto his back. He remembered within a second he was running. No. They got spit out of the cage violently. They were hurt, all three of them. Adam wasn't doing well, and Michael was preoccupied with making sure he was okay. He said something about a hospital and to stay and that he'd come back. Lucifer's mind was blurry. He got confused, and all he could think about was Sam. He just started running and didn't stop until he was falling down those steps, landing against a large metal door. He blacked out until later. Someone kneeled over him, tapping his shoulder. Sammy.
Nick?
He must have come up in Nick's body for some reason, but he could tell it felt different. He looked around as much as not moving his head too much aloud. He blinked in a daze.
Lucifer?
His eyes met Sam's, and he gave a lazy smile, tried lazily to take his hand without thinking better of it. Of course, Sam immediately pulled back. He looked away. Lucifer frowned. Should be paying attention to me. It was selfish, but he wasn't 100% in his right mind. He reached out to grab the chest of Sam's shirt, but only managed to latch onto his sleeve.
Dean! Cass, you up? Fuck. Crowley, get out here!
Sam looked down to him again, and he smiled up at him.
Hey, stay with me, you're okay.
Then there was someone else there. Lucifer looked at him inside. A demon, Crowley. He was Lilith's most trusted. He'd helped Sam and Dean try and stop him and Michael. He tried to say hi, but nothing came out. He'd say it later. But he gave a small smile before returning his stare to Sam.
That who you look afraid it is?
Crowley asked. Sam gave a short sigh.
Help me get him inside.
Sam tugged his sleeve free of Lucifer's grasp, which made him pout, but Sam removed his shirt and covered him. Was he naked?
Squirrel's gonna be pippy about this,
Crowley said. Sam positioned him to best carry him inside.
Are you gonna help me out or not?
Crowley sighed and went down to pick up his legs so they wouldn't drag. They both did their best to lift him onto the couch once they got there. He just cuddled up with the shirt.
Damn, why the hell is he so heavy? If I had to guess, I'd assume it's the wings.
They were both panting.
I'm gonna go get him some water.
Sam hurried out of the room, and Lucifer tried to stumble his way off the couch, only to collapse into Crowley's arms. Sam came back seconds later as Crowley was trying to get Lucifer to stay lying on the couch, Lucifer just trying to push him away and fall again. The second Sam was at his side trying to calm him, Lucifer was clinging to him as if he was drowning. "Don't leave again," was the best Lucifer was able to blurt out. Sam pressed him against the couch to stop his struggling.
It's okay. Just let me take care of you.
Maybe it could be okay. Maybe it was his turn to be taken care of.